Octopath 1 is one of those games that hits the water and everyone talks about. It was a fantastic RPG that held onto the roots of the traditional turn-based combat found in the early Final Fantasies. It had the spice needed to make it stand out with the Brave gauge of Bravely Default. Its own additions to the genre were the Break gauge and the 8 gripping narratives. It was lauded with success, not only for its gameplay, but also for its beautiful graphics and outstanding composition. So believe me when I say, Octopath walked so the sequel could run. So why did I hear no one talking about it? Don't get me wrong, the game has a dedicated fan base, but outside of that, I heard no one talking about this game. It feels like it fell through the cracks. 2023 has been one of the best years for gaming in recent memory. As a whole, the industry laid out many fantastic pieces for us to enjoy this year. Resident Evil 4 Remake, Tears of a Kingdom, Hi-Fi Rush, the list could go on. RPGs themselves have been eating extremely well. Final Fantasy XVI, Sea of Stars, Fire Emblem Engage, and we cannot ignore the massive hit that is Baldur's Gate 3. So, yeah, I see how Octopath 2 fell through the cracks. Octopath Traveler 2 is a turn-based RPG that sets itself apart from its contemporaries with 8 unique travelers to play as, hence the title. With those 8 stories, you get a fantastic amount of character and world building that you typically only get from a main character in any other RPG. In Octopath, all 8 travelers are created equally. Octopath 2 is a solid RPG that I would recommend to those with any skill level. A good intro to the genre if you've never played one before, and a will-be classic years down the road for fans to enjoy. Arguably, the standout selling point of the game at a glance is its glorious graphics. Graphics are always a contentious topic. However, I feel the general public is starting to realize that it's not graphics inherently that make a game look good, but it's art direction. Graphics are generational, but art direction is forever. Octopath 2 provides some of the best art direction in recent years. They had the basis down with Octopath 1, and refined it in Triangle Strategy, but I feel they perfected it with Octopath 2, a statement that will hold water until their next game furthers the progression. Regardless, I feel Octopath 2 is one of those games that will age perfectly fine and be 100% visually appealing 20 years down the line. The handcrafted 16-bit sprites do so much work, especially when you multiply how good they look with their animations, some of which are only made for 1 or 2 uses. Looking back, Octopath 1 had a very washed-out color palette, and their sprites were a bit all over the place with their design. Character models felt a little too lopsided when it came to their heads and bodies. The sequel remedies this with a more uniform design to the characters that we meet. You can see the progression of enemies as you go through the game, without them feeling super crowded and noisy. Of course, we also get those beautifully animated boss sprites being several times larger and more detailed than the rest.
What the fuck?
What do you mean? He's a perfectly normal person.
You know what? You have a valid point.
They are always outstanding and really show off just how much life can be expressed out of such a low-res art style. I mentioned before that the first game felt super washed out in comparison, whereas this entry has a much darker shading to it. It has a much stronger contrast between the vibrant oranges and greens compared to the silver snows and pitch black shadows. The Cavern of the Sun and Moon is probably the coolest use of a day and night cycle I have ever seen. We also get this awesome shot with Throne standing half in the dark, and I wish they did more of that. I also feel they do a lot more with the camera, showing off the 3D space, though this is an option you can turn off if it's not something you enjoy. The art direction is the groundwork, but the music and sound design is a major supporting pillar to the atmosphere of the game. Oh man, there's a lot to say here. Not too much about any one topic, but overall. The game has some very, very high notes brought in by the music and sound design.
I'm proud of you, son. Pops, you're no chickadee any longer. You're a full-fledged, bona fide merchant.
However, it is also where the game has the most amount of hiccups. The music is phenomenal through and through. Pieces played at each scene perfectly encapsulate and help you feel the moment they are portraying. However, it is when that music is missing that you notice it very quickly. There are a few moments in the game, and even a whole chapter, where music is non-existent, and it shows. I figured they did this for dramatic effect. The absence of something often speaks louder than when it is there. However, I don't think the payoff was there. Anytime it is highlighting the moment by removing music, only had me wishing there was something there to fill the void. On top of that, it's easy to spot mixing quality differences, despite the voice actors giving it their all. Paula's goodbye to her sister and the villain spitting their philosophical vitriol at the party really makes you feel what they're saying. Unfortunately for them, whoever mixed the audio failed to correctly balance audio levels from time to time. This is especially apparent in Temenos and Throne's crossover chapters.
There's not a thief out there who doesn't love treasure.
Is that a coin? Only a fool cares for charred coin. Reach into the fire and you'll get burned.
I also want to get a small localization nitpick out of the way. It was only a one-off thing, that I noticed anyway, and that's of the biwa. A biwa is commonly referred to as a Japanese lute. However, I feel, to leave it at that is beyond reductive. A biwa uses a bachi to release a terse sound to accompany story-based music, which is exactly what it's being used for in the scenario. So why are we reducing the Eastern-coded setting to a simple lute? Just feels like a giant jelly donut moment.
These donuts are great! Jelly-filled are my favorite! Nothing beats a jelly-filled donut!
If I had to pick a favorite theme out of the whole game, and without going into spoiler territory, it would have to be Partitio's theme. It knocks it out of the park. It really has you feeling the underdog success welling up inside you whenever it comes out, and it highlights the plucky merchant. I hear people saying that 2 has good audio, but not as good overall as the first. Just listening to the open theme shows you how much of an improvement 2 is over 1. It has a much more full sound that makes better use of the backline instruments to a far greater degree. Take this as someone who listened to the first game soundtrack ad nauseum. They might be the same song, but 2's improvement is tenfold. Now that we've talked about the set dressing, we can talk about the core of the gameplay. The flow of the game can be hard to quantify, as there is no right or wrong way to play it. You can recruit 4 of the members and play them all the way up to their final chapters, or you could do what I did and recruit all of the members right away and just do the lowest level mission possible while cycling your cast through the lowest levels. Regardless of how you choose to progress the overall narrative, each chapter starts when a required character enters a specific town. You can still enter these towns with the selected characters and not start their quests if you don't want to. They'll encounter an issue, which you usually have to solve by using one of the 2 path actions each character has before encountering a dungeon and a boss. Path actions continue over from the first game and are doubled up. During the day, a character might have an option to challenge someone to a duel, but at night they can only bribe them for information. There are 4 different types of path actions: gain info, gain items, recruit allies, and incapacitate. Between 8 characters, with day and night options, that you can change to at any time, you get 16 possible choices to act on, and they aren't super redundant, as there are different criteria for each character's path actions. Hikari and Temenos both gain info at night. However, when using Hikari, you can simply pay gold for the info, or you could get it for free if you can break the enemy with Temenos. More on breaking later. How you choose to use the path actions is up to you. Not every chapter has a boss, or even a dungeon though, which is a nice change of pace. I would have liked to have seen scenarios where you have to use path actions from other members outside of their chapters, but because they want you to be able to complete the game however you'd like, I can see why this cannot happen. There's no guarantee that a player will have a specific path action available to them if they are going about the game without a character who has that path action. It has been some time since I played the first, but I felt a much stronger reason for all of the travelers to actually be traveling together, despite their worldly different plights and journeys. Hikari needs allies to retake his kingdom outside of his chapter's compatriots. Agnia is literally a traveling dancer, and by far the least inclined to violence, so of course it would make sense that she would travel with others for her own safety. Hell, even Oswald tells you straight up why he needs traveling companions when you find him. The Ludo narrative falls apart, much like the first game, where the extra travelers never show up outside of their own chapters, outside of some optional dialogue and some cutscenes, but it's not nearly as piecemeal as the first game. Those extra moments with the cast where they each talk to each other are some of the best dialogues the game has to offer for realizing the 8 travelers and humanizing them. This game does not shy away from some pretty explicit innuendos either.
That I've had a look at you. Let me have a look at that mighty staff of yours, won't you?
It's kind of funny how thinly they veil the crass language. You can actually learn a lot about them before the main story even tells you. You might even miss some stuff the main story wouldn't share if you didn't dig into these little side bits. Cassie straight up mentions a physical symptom of her affliction well before it is brought up properly at the end of the chapter. Ochette really kills it with the interaction regarding both Cassie and Temenos. On top of these moments, we also have companion quests. When two characters complete their second chapter and their fourth chapters respectively, you are offered a small chapter where two travelers hang out and solve an issue. From an intrigue plot to helping a scholar invent the telescope, these crossed paths do wonders for humanizing the cast, as well as laying the foundation for setting up its world building. When you have 8 main characters who are properly treated as such, I could easily see stuff like this being left by the wayside. But it isn't. I was so invested in these stories that I really didn't mind that the game was essentially 60% movie, 40% game. In between cutscenes, occasionally you will be tasked with using a path action, or even worse, just picking up an item before the cutscene starts again. It feels like the game is just reminding you that, hey, this is a game and not just a movie. The game offsets this with some very intriguing writing to keep you engaged. Most of the time. Small spoiler for Throne's second chapter, there comes a point when she has to use a code phrase to enter a thieves' den. The code phrase involves drinking with your left hand. So naturally, when the plot progresses and you are playing Russian roulette with poison cups, you are given an option between a left and a right cup. The real genius lies when you, the player, remembers the passcode and instinctively checks the left cup option and are met with a blood stain behind it. This naturally tells the player that this is the poison cup, despite your natural disposition beforehand. When I saw this, I had to take a step back and give the whole scene a round of applause. It also really hits home with the old school RPG moment, in unlocking the alternative travel method in the boat. At this point of the game, I was not swimming in gold, something very easy to do by the end, so I went on a little crime spree stealing from all the towns I had forgotten to hit along the way, to get a little bit more funds for this expenditure. It really reminded me of getting the ship and the airship back in the original Final Fantasy. Octopath 2 also returns to an era where you actively can see the choices presented on your characters in meaningful ways, from the obvious changing of your clothes when equipping different jobs, to the different sprites for weapons you find along the way. I've mentioned a few times now, but it really does feel like a fantastic homage to the early Final Fantasies. It's not just the main characters that are interesting either. NPCs can be dark and interesting as fuck. Honestly, you should inquire with everyone you meet. There's so much story to be told with each location that it's easy to miss by just playing the game at face value. It feels like that feeling in MMOs where you kind of just skip over all the fluff texts to, hey, give me the next quest, give me the next quest, give me the next quest, okay, the game's finished. No, you don't want to skip over this text. Take a moment, slow down, and actually read it. There's so much to be found here. The narrative really shines in the final chapter as well. Everyone has a chance to speak and interact with each other in the fully realized world that you've come to know like the back of your hand. I see clearly how you couldn't have this kind of writing throughout the rest of the game, given how free you are to get to this point. Unfortunately, even with the addition of the night and day cycle, each character having 2 paths action, some are left in the dust compared to the others. Hikari's bribe and Oswald's mug abilities were extremely underutilized, I feel. The game also sports one of the creepiest and unnerving settings I have ever experienced in quite a long time, especially for a game not strictly in a horror setting. It just oozes a slimy atmosphere where you know something is wrong. If you played the game, you know exactly where I am talking about. That only makes up half of the game. Needless to say, I like turn-based combat. I actually prefer it. I would feel like I'm in the minority if it wasn't for the gigantic amount of success the genre has achieved of late. But then again, you also get people like this who complain about lack of non-turn-based mode. But creators' intent is a whole other issue. Octopath Traveler 2 takes the runaway success of the first game and refines it. What makes it stand out from the rest is the boost gauge. Those little blips that hover over each traveler's HP bar. For each turn that you don't use a boost, you will get 1 boost point. There are alternative methods for getting boost points, but I'll talk about those later. You can spend boost points to increase the number of attacks you can do in one turn, or enhance the skill to be more potent. How you use these boosts are very important because of the opponent's break gauge. Enemies have a blue shield next to their name with a large number plastered on it. This is their break bar. In order to break the enemy, you have to hit them with a weapon or element that they are weak to. When the number reaches 0, the enemy breaks. Pretty self-explanatory. Once in a broken state, they will lose their turn for the current round of combat if they haven't already gone yet, and the next turn as well. When in this state, they will take more damage, and most random encounters can be ended here and now. However, if you fail to kill the opponent, they are guaranteed to move first on the following turn, no matter what. Fights play out pretty similar no matter what point of the game. You engage a new type of enemy, learn their weaknesses through trial and error, win, and repeat. I should rephrase that a bit. It's not a total crapshoot when guessing weaknesses. Often 1 or 2 weaknesses make logical sense. Birds are often weak to bows. Okay. Demons and undead are weak to light spells. Sure. Fish are weak to spears? spearfishing, okay, I got it. But for most of the humanoid enemies, it's far more case by case, and you'll have to intuit the weaknesses given to the circumstances you're in. Enemies feel like a puzzle, and that's engaging. There is enough variety in terms of the individual enemies as well as the possible combinations you'll encounter in an area. It prevents the just spam A boredom that plagues the genre. Just spam A doesn't work here. If you're not breaking the opponent, you are taking twice or even 3 times as long to get through the encounter. I am now absolutely mortified at the thought of someone attempting to complete a run without breaking an enemy. It gets a bit deeper when engaging bosses. Often you'll have to save their broken state for when it is most optimal. Bosses will charge up their super moves that will ravage your team's well-being if you don't intercept it. That's a good scenario to break the boss. But there is another metric to this choice. Is your team set up to capitalize on the broken state? You might have used all your boost gauge to break the boss and now you can't deal those dopamine levels of damage. Boost gauge is amazing for both defensive and defensive options. Another great part of the series is that I thank Square Enix for doing justice to the job system. All 8 travelers have a unique class that they cannot change out of: warrior, apothecary, hunter, thief, cleric, scholar, merchant, and dancer. What you can do to flesh them out and round out your party is to equip each character with a secondary class, assuming you found the corresponding license from a job master. When equipping a second job, that character benefits from all the types of equipment and skills that job offers. The only thing not shared is the character's unique actions. Cassie is the only apothecary that can mix and combine leaves for positive effects for the party and negative effects for the opponents, even if you assign the apothecary job to another member. The game also sports 4 secret jobs that have a unique and often hidden mechanic to unlock their skill set. This leads to a robust amount of possibilities in terms of party combinations. Not all are created equal, but nothing is stopping you from turning the mage Oswald into a part-time warrior. His low base physical stats will hamper you compared to if you just put on the already physically focused Ochette instead, and vice versa. But the choice of experimentation is there and is a welcome option. Okay, the gameplay loop is gold, but do I have to grind? Most likely not. I only had 2 bouts where I felt the desire to grind, but not a need. Chapters are often roughly the same level across the board, and this is where things can get complex. An intersection of so many moving parts. It's between the second and third chapters that there's a bit of a gap between the levels. I was actively swapping between my supporting party members as I wanted to go through all the chapters one level at a time for each character. This is how I had fun, but it's also out of wanting to avoid the issue I had with the first Octopath Traveler: over-leveling. And I can say with confidence that it isn't something you need to worry about. See, the character you picked first is considered your protagonist, and they cannot be removed from the party until you finish their final chapter, which across the board is level 45. For reference, the final boss of the game is considered to be level 60 content. If you're trying to balance your party to enjoy each chapter on content, you will fail. Your protagonist will always outlevel the other 7 travelers. Believe me when I say that that is okay. It doesn't break the balance. Octopath Traveler 2, outside of the final chapter and super secret boss, is just not that hard of a game, even by JRPG standards. I truly believe that this could be your first JRPG and you will be just fine no matter what you do. The point I'm trying to make is that you don't need to grind. Everything will even out by the end of the game, even if you choose not to look into the super secret final boss. I initially planned to play through all the darker character stories first, but when I saw that the cross paths exist, something that the first game lacked, I was enticed to play the chapters in numerical order. The only person I could not take out of the party was Hikari, because he was my protagonist. The game, I feel, isn't meant to be super balanced. And I still had fun. Damn, that was a hell of a tangent that was supposed to be the combat portion of the video. Let me shotgun out a few more points here that I wanted to bring up without having too much to say about them. Cassie's apothecary skills just don't scale well, and I immediately take this back. When you play her right, she does amazing work. It's just a shame that you have to use 2 items to make them scale well, but it takes care of itself pretty well with the palm leaves. Octopuff and Kate farming is actually quite fun and engaging, and it's a fun little sub-game of optimizing how you can cash in on these lucrative enemies. I've always been a fan of metal slime type grinding, should you need it, but I understand that this might not be everyone's preference. And who thought that the hired assassins were okay? Like, who approved of this shit? JRPGs have a reputation of having contrived plot lines and stories, and while Octopath 2 doesn't dodge every pitfall of writing, it does a pretty great job of being a competent set of stories that all wrap up with a very pleasing payoff. The Ludo narrative doesn't always make sense, but that's rarely a sore spot when you enjoy the writing. I consider story beats to be just as spoilery as narrative twists, and those are the best part of a story to experience for yourself. Regardless, I will keep myself speaking to a brief summary of each character's initial goals, and how I feel that the stories worked for me. Stories and terms, at least in the beginning, are all quite generic. The story doesn't care who the king is of a kingdom if it doesn't pertain to one of the traveler's stories, and neither should you. The writing is wholly focused on the main characters' journeys, their antagonists, and their overarching goals. The story has stripped all of the useless fat, and what we are left with is a very lean and enjoyable experience. It knows the terms aren't needed to be specific, as long as the stories are good. What is it with me and food metaphors this video? The story can be very mature, in a way a game presented in such a way wouldn't usually touch on. Manipulation of children, chemical warfare, political corruption, and human trafficking, just to name a few. And those are just some of the themes of the main stories. Don't get me started on some of the dirt you can find on one-off NPCs in the middle of a market square. The game doesn't revel in these dark fantasies, but it uses them to effectively create a pit in your stomach that urges you to continue the stories and see their dark machinations put to an end. The story can be equally moving as well. For as little time as you spend with some characters, you feel for their plights just as much as those you follow for the roughly 60 hours of game's average runtime. I'll admit, some parts got me to tear up a bit. Every little bit went into making the heartstrings feel pulled when they needed to. Oswald's second quest is an absolute emotional gut punch. Stories can line up oddly, like Temenos' Chapter 2 and Cassie's Chapter 1, with the apothecaries both being dead and out of town. I could chalk this up to more localization issues at least, if it wasn't already just a minor oversight in the writing. It would have been cool if they had both been the same reason though, if in both chapters the apothecaries were either dead or out of town, but not both. It also would have been fantastic if both chapters mentioned the other traveler coming through, if you had completed their chapter before the other. The game strikes a good balance between serious moments and a much looser storytelling. If I had a coin for every boss that begged for mercy when you've beaten them, I'd have a lot of coins. And I know Agnia is supposed to be super naive, but come on. Joining a random man on the street who offers you a drink immediately is just idiotic. Melia is absolutely one of the most mature and well-developed characters, despite being a literal child. So of course I stole her late mom's necklace off of her. This is the same game where we have an evil captain of the guard who likes money because it's money. I'm not slighting that kind of villain either. A good mustache-twirling villain is necessary sometimes and can be a good trope. But to have both in the same game really shows you how dynamic and deep the characters are. The game is not afraid to kill off characters either. Almost no one feels safe given just how many people, both good and bad, bite the dust. Anyone outside of the main 8 is just not safe. Something that dawned on me around the middle of the game is how each of the 8 characters are challenged with a different type of conflict. Some of these are a stretch, but the party fills the 8 types of conflict. These are very nebulous claims, and it could be argued that at any time each character represents a different conflict. These will be spoilers, so if you want to skip this bit, go to the timestamp I have on screen now. Okay, here we go. Hikari best represents man versus self. This is pretty self-explanatory. Up until the final conflict, Hikari is constantly struggling with the curse of the blood of Clan Ku. Oswald best represents man versus man. Harvey is a man, but also Oswald's monster that he must put down. A classic tale of good versus evil. Ochette best represents man versus nature. The coming calamity foretold at the start of her journey is the nature of the world to summon these monsters thanks to their dark god. Temenos best represents man versus god. Not only does he question the gods as his driving character's element, but he also exposes those who put a little too much or too little faith in them. Throne best represents man versus reality. The reality that the game was rigged from the start and her fight to escape it. The range of emotions she experiences when she figures this out is among the most human reactions in the entire game. Agnia best represents man versus society. One of the larger stretches, but if you take a step back from her literal fights in the story, is her struggling with the pressures of society and figuring out what it means to be a star. Casti best represents man versus no god. The biggest stretch without too many spoilers, Casti's story revolves around humans putting in the work to fix things around them, instead of looking for a god for excuse. Particio best represents man versus technology, because he is engaged with the conflict caused by the invention of the steam engine. Also, he literally fights a train and no, he can't suplex it. I like to use this channel and platform to talk about games I am passionate about. Octopath 2 isn't a perfect game, but in terms of JRPGs, I can easily sell it as one of the best in the market right now. It has some really high highs, and the presentation offered with the production is really good. If you're even the slightest bit interested, I highly recommend it. Put it on your Steam wishlist, there's a good chance that you'll catch it going on sale for half off or more. That's the end of the Octopath part of the video. I really hate self-promotion, so I'll just say this once, and then I'll be putting the link in the description from now on. But I made a Patreon for those who wish to support me. All tiers get access to my community Discord, where I spend most of my online presence. Lowest tier is $1, and you only get charged for the first video I put out each month. If I put out 2 in a month, you won't get charged for the second one. That's all for me. See you next time. Probably either with Chapter 5 of Limbus Company, or if we get a story with the next event.